My name is Tiffany Schreane. I'm president of Optilytics Media, based in New York City. It's a very, very rainy day here in New York City, and we focus primarily at Optilytics on an element of advertising marketing, but we essentially bake everything within data-driven insights. So we start with data and we end with data. It's kind of like the way that we like to introduce ourselves by finding predictable measurements to be able to help clients best invest their dollars and look at quality. And then we end with data by making sure that we've successfully met the goals that we have in place.
Great. My name is Tsvetan Tsvetkov. I go by T for obvious reasons. I work at Nielsen, so I'm more on the vendor side, but I work in our performance measurement practice, so focusing on the performance metrics around marketing through marketing mix, multi-touch attribution, and lift solution. So really understanding the payback, the ROI of your marketing dollars.
Hi, my name's Aarti, and I am based in Melbourne, Australia. I recently moved back from the Bay Area, and I lead the marketing procurement team at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Thanks.
Is everyone gone? I'll go if everyone's gone. Okay. Hi, Brennan, currently COO at Ninth Wonder. Previous to that, for my first 17 years of my career, I was in marketing. Last position was a VP of marketing at Wells Fargo. And then I jumped the fence and transitioned to procurement and did that for about 13 years with Mattel and Adidas, and then jumped the fence again. And now I'm on the agency side. So great. Well, nice to see everyone. And sorry for the delays on my end. Typical day-to-day Zoom, Teams, conference calls, and batteries and things like that. So apologies for the delay. So today we're here to talk about ad metrics and the future of ad metrics, and really thank Tiffany and Aarti and T for joining us and to have this really insightful conversation. So maybe we just start with the big question, guys, and that is, obviously we're in this state of of new world operations, whereby everyone is transitioning to the digital world and realizing how important e-commerce is for sales, how important advertising through digital and having relative content that's trackable and great ROI is so important. So there's probably many chief marketing officers in the world trying to get more funding in some way, shape, or form from a CFO, who is then asking them, that's beautiful, what's the ROI? And then we'll talk about, adding more money, and they probably have a procurement team simultaneously that is looking to find efficiencies. So what are some of the things that you're seeing in the marketplace, or that you could speak to help the folks on the call today really think about what they should be focusing on in this time? Like, what are the shifts that are happening, both from a cost perspective and from a return on investment and tracking perspective, and how they should consider things? And I see T's head is nodding heavily here. So maybe T, let's start with you.
Yeah, so we obviously work with hundreds of advertisers as well as publishers and agencies in this space. And first of all, there's a few trends that are happening, some kind of long-term trends and some because of COVID. Absolutely, e-commerce and digital are front and center. I think the stats out there that there's been more increase. The growth in e-commerce in the past 7 or 8 months represents a total of about 6 years of growth that it would have actually happened under normal circumstances over a 6 year period. So that's definitely a big trend we see. Now, a couple of things here on, this team in the audience here are stewards of the dollars for all these organizations. A lot of what we advise our clients on is, first of all, take advantage of the size of your portfolio. So if we're talking about multiple products or brands within a particular advertiser's portfolio, making sure that they don't treat their brands all the same way. So there is a big difference and a lot of opportunity in really investing even in under tough times, it makes sense to overinvest in some of your brands while you're maybe underinvesting in others. So really understanding the power of your portfolio is one of the kind of the recommendations here. The other one is absolutely understand the ROI on digital. So not just the kind of the effectiveness or the trends in digital, because often there's decisions that are made on what is the hottest property out there that we want to invest in, but usually that hottest property or hottest channel is also one of the most expensive. So kind of balancing that arbitrage that might be happening in the marketplace. So one of the stats we see with traditional media, TV and some of the more traditional media, the difference between the top performing advertising and the bottom, like the top quartile and the bottom quartile, 25%, is about 2-to-1 ratio of how well one performs versus the other. In digital, that ratio is about 4 to 5 to 1, right? So basically you end up with a lot more arbitrage opportunity within the space. And I'll stop and let everybody talk as well.
Great, thank you, T. Aarti or Tiffany, did you have anything to add to that?
I can just jump in and say, totally agree with everything that T just mentioned. Right now, what we have been seeing is that in a lot of instances, people are doing a lot more innovative things because, you know, particularly within TV, and probably the last couple of weeks, you've had, you know, presidential elections, NBA playoffs, yeah, the start of NFL. So people's commercial spots are getting thrown all over the place. So them being able to shift those dollars earlier in the year and kind of know how to consistently move that shift and be innovative and moving into other channels. Definitely what T said, understand if you are doing an email campaign, if you are doing a text or a digital ad, if you are doing a social media campaign, understand prior into that campaign and the execution, why are you using this? What is the goal of using this channel? That way you can kind of put together a success book or a metrics or measurements of success. What does this look like coming out of this campaign? Secondly, coming from the auditing role for so long, typically we would use things such as pools, which I'm sure we'll talk about that later in the panel, but we would use things as pools where we would look at on the back end the way a client's advertising dollars are working, and we would use that as a sort of a benchmark. We're going to have to lean a little bit more on some of these industry benchmarks that maybe are a little bit unstable, but it kind of gets you in an area where you can start. You can know exactly this is what we're going to use as our measurement of success. This is the industry benchmark, and then you can kind of from that point start your own benchmarks and know what you're going to do year after year.
Great, thanks, Tiffany. So another question that I had is, who's doing it well? You know, who can you guys speak to, and if you're comfortable speaking to, or maybe you can talk industry-wise if you don't want to talk brand specifics. But you know, who's doing it well and why? What's happening in that space that others could learn from?
Yeah, unfortunately, I cannot share pertinent client information, but I would say that the companies that are doing this well are really looking at the ROI, they are looking at the payback of their marketing dollars, but it's really about going beyond the payback. I mean, there's companies that would tie compensation to the ROI, which we would never advise against because it really brings kind of a short-term view of the problem. Companies that are doing it well are really looking at this as a long-term investment. So investment in the long-term growth of their brands and of their businesses. So especially with COVID, what we're seeing is companies looking to protect their brand in this kind of situations, but also the ones that are doing it really well are looking to take kind of their disproportionate, higher than their fair share of the marketplace during these times, whether it's by investing in kind of the immediate sales response, as well as investing in their brand equity and kind of the long-term impact of their brand.
That's great. Thank you, T. Did Tiffany or Aarti, do you have any input on that? Obviously, Aarti might be biased, but you know.
Oh, sure. I can jump in here. Again, agree with T here as well. Constant, I think we probably hear the word innovation over the last few years, probably more than we probably desired to hear it. But this has definitely been the year or the last few months, if you will, where you can see that innovation grow at scale. So again, don't want to kind of like pinpoint specific companies here, but what I will say are these companies who are essentially saying, well, I know, year over year, years in, we're always looking at our goals. And by the next year, I was telling someone the other day, at the end of 2019, we were looking at what goals we want to achieve in 2020. And then what happens is at the end of 2020, you're not even looking at 2019's goals, you're establishing or reestablishing new goals. Now is the time to actually put pen to paper and establish what are these goals that we want to achieve in that following year. And it really does start by looking at what you did in a year of, I don't want to say turmoil, but in a year of change, if you will, because that change can sometimes be a great lens into how you want to move forward. Is this something that we found that works? Is this something that we found that didn't work? And how can we best position that or reposition that strategy or that channel to our best effort in the future?
Great. Thank you, Tiffany. To that point, as we look forward, to 2021 and 5-year plans, and people really thinking about what's next, the whole topic is about the future of ad metrics. What are some of the things that maybe aren't on the forefront yet that you are starting to see come down the pipeline, or things that people are thinking of, shifts that, companies should start thinking of in the next, 1 to 5 years?
I'll jump in here and say definitely predictive shifts. As I mentioned earlier, with media auditing, you typically look at the back end of the way or the post performance of your campaign. I think what we've seen, even if you look at like the food delivery apps or grocery delivery apps like a Fresh Direct or something of that nature, so many articles surrounding really supply chain and marketing and how things kind of come together over the summer. They begin to see that when this happened, they weren't able to meet up with customer demand. So they had to kind of go back and regroup on some things to kind of say, okay, here's what we need to do moving forward. So I definitely think over the next at least 18 to 24 months, one thing to keep in mind is definitely marketing efficiency. We want to kind of go back to our marketing 101 classes and talk about the SMART goals. What is achievable and what is relevant? That A and that R definitely kind of come into play when we're looking at 2020 and 2021 and moving forward. And definitely customer-centric activity. There are shifts in customer behavior, particularly within retail. We're seeing these shifts. We're seeing in shifts of the way that they're buying. They're not necessarily, in a lot of cases, they're in necessary cases, such as grocery stores. They aren't reducing in their buying. What they're doing is they're grouping their buying together. So where someone may have been able to go to the grocery store week after week, studies have shown that now people are taking that money and they're saying we're going to the store once a month, buying the same things, but on a once a month basis. So almost like buying in the surplus. So definitely looking at the achievable and the relevant piece moving forward, and also looking at the customer demand. What are expectations? What did we learn from here? And almost kind of like a haircut theory, as a former coworker of mine used to always say, it's better to kind of start small and kind of cut our way around to kind of see how we shape out in the end, leaving the door wide open for any type of innovation or anything to come into play.
Great. Thank you, Tiffany. So I do see a couple of questions I'm going to bring up from the chat. So what is a good measuring period that is considered as long-term? Obviously, the client is always eager to see results and quick wins. So who wants to take that one?
Since I mentioned the term, I'll start. So we're not talking 10 years out, right? We're talking 2 to 3 years. Again, there's a famous article in the Harvard Business Review called "If brands are managed over, if brands are built over years, why are they managed over quarters?" And part of it has to do with we need to meet our quarterly goals, right? That's just imperative for any business. So it really does take the right balance. It does take a bit of chutzpah to basically be able to focus on the long run and maybe give up a little bit in the short term. But long term, the way we define it within kind of the advertising space is more of a 2 to 3 year period. So beyond year one, the industry has famously used kind of the multiplier of 2 of if something generates X dollars in the next year, it's going to generate another X in years 2 and 3 simply because you're building your brand equity and the tide shifts all boats. We've seen that number, that multiplier, while it kind of averages around 2, actually surprisingly, that number that agencies and advertisers have been using for years is pretty good as an average. The range of that number can be anywhere between 1.1, which is very little in terms of long-term impact, to 3 or 4, right? You can get 3 or 4 times in years 2 and 3, depending on the category, right? Whether it's, take for example, hair coloring, right? Any therapeutic category or any pharmaceutical category, once you kind of commit, it really has once you win a customer, it has a real long-term impact. And I'm sure that's true for technology in Aarti's world and HP's world and other industries as well, like automotive, of course. But I would say 2 is what companies use. I would always recommend that they would kind of go in and try to understand their own multiplier so they can make that trade-off between short and long term in a more informed manner.
Thank you, T.
Yeah, I could add to that as well, T. I think you hit the nail on the head when you spoke about, tech and B2B. For us, I think we're looking at more 12 to 24 months.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Very long-term thinking. And it probably depends on the dynamics of your company, right? Your product life cycle and how everything ties together, right? So I would imagine companies that have a shorter turnaround for their service or their product are probably going to have a lot shorter runway, right? Versus others. So that's great. Aarti, you live this every day. Much of what many of the procurement professionals here are probably, trying to hear about. And, could you share your experience in managing, dealing the future of ad metrics at Hewlett and how you guys look at things, how you partner with your CMO, when does this topic come up, how often, and, what are some of the challenges that you're facing in trying to navigate, through partnerships and making sure you're not cost focused, but really value focused and how you drive that true value for marketing. So.
Absolutely. So I think, just because we've been through a ton of transformation, just going from a HBQ to more of a B2B within the enterprise space, but as well as what's shifting in the market, what I have found is, the earlier conversations we used to have with our CMOs used to be around when the AOR renewals would come up, and it will be a very cost-focused discussion. That's completely moved. Procurement, like we've never been busier than we have been because we're moving into a more of a value-based discussion. It's actually less focused on cost. I would say it's more 20 to 30% is cost-based. We're getting very mechanical almost, and a ton of the negotiations are around metrics, around ROI, and it's not just the vague, larger ROI around MGOs, but it's very specific around campaigns, and they're very short term as well, as we just spoke about. So we're getting very, we're getting looped in because while we're not directly tying it back to compensation, we're constantly measuring value. So we're getting very involved in the supplier engagement, the supply management. We're in meetings on quarterly reviews, not like the traditional, let's just see if it's working relationally, but now it's really procurement's getting involved in the measurement aspect, which has really fostered a closer relationship between marketing. They're really seeing the value. And I think the more we can position ourselves as procurement professionals and really get involved in metrics and reporting and measurement, I think that's where I can see the CMO and the marketing organizations really identify the true value of procurement, because rates and cost is quite overrated at the moment. So we just have to really get into the total value.
Aarti, do you have any recommendations? Now I'm on the agency side, and it's so interesting having been on all 3 sides now, from a client side marketer, from a client side procurement professional, and now from the agency side. What kind of things do you do to try to help your agency partners be more effective for your client? And what kind of things do you recommend, if there's any folks here that are actually serving clients, or for procurement professionals that are helping those that are serving clients, you know, what reality checks do you put in place for the agencies to say, hey, you need to really make sure you're focusing on this or thinking about this, or here's how you best partner with our company, you know, and so on and so forth, you know, specifically within this space.
Yes, again, I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's all about relationship. And as I said earlier, we used to kind of, you know, procurement used to meet with agencies during the typical QBRs and, you know, the annual renewals and so on. Right. I think, you know, in the last 12, 24 months, what I've seen is a real shift where I personally have taken an approach where we don't have time for this. Let's just get into, you know, let's get our hands dirty. Let's go get, I think transparency for me has been like the guiding principle. You know, the more we trust the relationship, we just, I've, you know, really had to get in and say, look, guys, this is really what it is. And I think they value the transparency. And we're able to really turn around some of these negotiations a lot quicker because the more they understand what we need and they don't see us as, you know, they're coming now to cut costs further, or they're looking at us as, again, we're moving away from that cost discussion. But, you know, I've just identified that agencies have partnered much better with myself as well as my other colleagues, as you know, just as much as I'm able to be transparent, I'm able to identify with the business and with the agency. And you know, I think T, you might have touched upon this, understanding your portfolio, but also leveraging volume, right? So from a procurement standpoint, it is about that. It's about, okay, who in the other, like, so I've done a lot of that where, you know, particularly if you're in a procurement function where you're managing multiple business units, it's about bringing some of those business units together, but still being able to identify that different portfolios have their nuances. So I think it's how you position yourself as a subject matter expert, you know, drive transparency and relationship. And you cannot just be with an agency during those traditional, you know, we're here to negotiate. I think it's just an ongoing relationship, and both with marketing as well as with your agency.
Great, thank you, Aarti. That's awesome. Tiffany or T, I don't know. I mean, you have a different perspective, but I don't know if you.
I completely agree, and I really appreciate Aarti talking about value versus cost. Again, I mean, cost is extremely important to any organization, but it's such a kind of dynamic and heterogeneous metric of how our business is performing that you know, top line is still a top priority. Again, nobody comes to us and says, hey, I want to be as profitable as possible and I'm okay if I don't grow. Everybody's coming in and saying, okay, I want to reduce costs and I want to increase my top line growth. So that balance is what we always look at. And I agree about scale. I think scale is important. Long-term strategy is important. One thing that actually Tiffany touched on that I did want to follow up on was she talked about benchmarks and norms. And I think I want organizations to kind of embrace benchmarks and norms, because what they're really kind of a steady state set of metrics and KPIs that help you actually predict better, right? They really help you know kind of what the steady state of the industry or the business might be over the 1 or 2 year period. So we very much encourage our clients to embrace, you know, normative types of information while at the same time understanding the nuances of their business.
Beautiful. Thank you, T. I want to go on to another question, but first, there's a question from the audience. So Rob Straight said, good point. What is the frequency of your business reviews with the suppliers? Is it quarterly or monthly or something else? So Aarti, I think that might be directed towards you.
Sure. So as I said, traditionally with our agencies of record, it used to be quarterly, but I think now we're just saying that we don't have a formalized, we still do, for all good reasons, we do have, you know, those on the calendar, but we're really going into the investment. And if that's a key campaign, we want to get into it. I meet with some of my agencies weekly. You know, we have it on our calendars. If we don't need to meet, that's fine. But again, it's just about fostering and being very, you know, in the weeds sometimes, but also not treading on their toes too much. But yeah, so it really depends on the investment. And when I say investment, I also want to just call out on something here that I think traditionally procurement always looked at spend as the criteria. I look at it more as an investment. So it could be a lower value, but if it's driving more investment for the company, then I think I need to be more invested myself in that, as opposed to just, the high spend, because a lot of it could have just been passed through. So really just identifying where as procurement professionals adding the real value is probably key.
Yep, I would agree. Being on this side, it's really interesting because there's so much to manage, and more than 80% of the cost of an agency is the people. And the billable hour concept is a hot topic constantly, so spending time with your clients is super critical, because that's your reason for existing and being. So I encourage everyone to encourage their marketing stakeholders and clients to be very proactive with you in engaging with your agency. It's so much to learn when you jump on the other side of the fence, and I would say from our perspective, we do a lot of media, and there's a lot of conversations around ad metrics with our clients, coming from us pushing it that way, less so from the clients coming to us, which is really interesting. So really trying to encourage those conversations to happen. It doesn't have, there should be a formal, I think, check-in, at least once a quarter or twice a year, absolute minimum. But there should also be a very informal kind of process too, which is super important. But one of the other topics I wanted to talk about that many of the people do here is obviously the run pitches for business. So would love to talk about each of your best experiences and best practices in running pitches for this space, which is totally different. You're not showing creative, it's you're talking analytics. So what are some great ways for people to find partners in this space? And what are some great ways for them to actually execute engaging those partnerships? Should it be test runs with small pilot efforts off the top and not running pitches? Should it be running pitches? And if so, what does that look like? So just some ideas and experiences that you guys have had.
I'll kick off here. Running a pitch can be very customizable, primarily because each, if you're an agency, each client is looking for something completely different. Of course, they're looking for qualitative measures. They're also looking for quantitative measures. They're looking for creative measures in some instances. So it can be, depending on what that client's needs are, it could very well customize, depend on that. One thing that I would probably say that I've seen that has worked in the past, it has worked in some clients it hasn't. It's something that I already mentioned earlier. I'm a huge proponent or a huge fan of a playbook. And one thing that I think that has worked well is when procurement and marketing come together prior to executing any pitch, prior to reaching out to a third-party partner who's going to execute that pitch, or even if they are going to execute it internally. There are benefits to both. There are benefits if you're working with an external partner who has a bit more read on the space, the media space particularly. There's benefits running it internally if maybe your particular brand has a better read on your space internally, and you want to be able to catch those nuances and understand them. So I definitely think there are advantages and disadvantages to both. But if procurement and marketing can come together, create that playbook of understanding what are some non-negotiables, because on both ends there are, and then what can we do to come together almost to kind of what measurement plan are we looking at for the agency to bring us. It will cut down on the back end a lot of back and forth, because you don't want to have a procurement lead reaching out to the agency and then a marketing lead reaching out to the agency, and those needs are totally different and they begin to kind of repel against each other. So that's definitely one thing that I would say moving forward. But as I mentioned earlier, advantages and disadvantages to both. I've seen both. I've seen internally where a brand ran their own pitch and everything, went smoothly. Sometimes it didn't. I've seen some instances where a third party person can come in the thing about it is, in third party, you do have some pitch consultants who they're both, they have a background in agency. They have a understanding of the market and the space at that current time. And those are some advantages that you definitely want to look for. What you don't want to see is a third-party company who essentially just looks and says, okay, we compared the 5 different agencies that you asked us to compare against, and this agency was the one who came in with the most inefficient rates. That can lead to a bunch of issues on the back end, because if the client comes 6 months or 10 months into the contract being won, and they're saying, okay, now we want to run on the Super Bowl, and we have this, very small budget that we're working with, that can definitely, depending on what that third-party consultant put in place as how they measure success for that client, that could definitely be a disadvantage that could hurt the brand on the back end.
Yeah, I would agree 100%, Tiffany. I've many ideas on how to do things differently now, being on the other side of the fence.
Yeah,
T, it looks like you're nodding. Yeah,
I am agreeing so much. It's funny because I was just writing my thoughts on this, and Tiffany already said half of the stuff I wrote down, which is kind of funny. But yes, I mean, we're in a space where we're not buying widgets, right? We're in a space where you're buying either people or services, in a lot of kind of intangibles, right? And I think it's obviously the procurement teams have a very difficult job understanding and kind of mapping out the value to the investment. So the only suggestion here is just look beyond, right? Look at the intangibles, look at the long-term relationship, look beyond the specific comparison. And there is ways to evaluate and to quantify, the years of experience of the team, the size of the business or the purview that this particular third party or partner has over the industry, because we're all in this for the long term. And I'm mentioning this again. So delivering on the specific engagement is great, but this is a value chain that we're creating with these kind of, whether it's analytics or marketing effectiveness investments that companies do. And it's not, it's one and done, right? It's an ongoing investment. And we like to bring something new every year. It's kind of, if you're staying, again, if you're not moving, then you're falling behind.
exactly. Couldn't agree more on that, you guys. There's definitely we're currently involved in a very big pitch, and things like holding one call for all agencies to ask questions is a really bad idea. So, just little things like that can make the world of a difference. Take the time to have the one-on-one calls, or let people submit questions throughout the entire process. Keep the door open. Following a rigid process where you have clearly defined dates for people to submit questions and whatnot is not reflective of how the relationship will operate. So, run a process that's reflective of how you would operate in a relationship. And just remember, just like when you're interviewing for a job, for a new company, you don't know the culture within that company. And, you're trying your best to plan and prepare and understand, but without that insider information, makes it really hard. So I also encourage the procurement professionals to become really good confidants and partners of the agency partners that you're working with. And, and try to give them, obviously you can't tell them certain things, but try to give them some, insight that will be helpful, that's, fair and equitable for everybody to have. I also encourage doing should-cost models ahead of time, and thinking through your budgets before you go into pitches, and trying to give people some kind of idea, because not giving them any ramification, guidelines, or ranges for budgets can also be really challenging for people coming in trying to assess what exactly you're looking for. So just little small things, and this could parlay into any really category, if you will, within procurement. So yeah, so thank you guys. That's amazing. You know, we have just about 7 minutes left. I don't know, you know, Aarti, and Tiffany, if there's any, you know, things that you really wanted to touch on. And then the chat seems to be, there's not a bunch of questions right now. But, you know, if anyone has any additional questions, please ask away. But yeah, T or Aarti or Tiffany, if there's anything that we haven't touched on, one thing that I would love to touch on in our next, you know, now 6 minutes is technology. We haven't specifically talked about that. So, so if any of you, you know, want to touch on that, and then also share any other insights you'd like to. And feel free, whoever wants to go first.
Just to clarify, Marianne, this is technology around kind of the procurement process, or technology in general in the marketing space?
I would say in general, specifically in ad metrics, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, where everything is so tight with real-time bidding and other elements that have basically taken out any give in the system. So the world has become a lot more efficient in that regard. I always warn against just the intangibles here, right? Like really understanding what's happening outside of kind of direct mapping of costs to outcomes, and thinking about, you know, what does that mean? Yes, I'm achieving this in the short run. What does it mean for the long run? But also, what does it mean in light of my overall strategy? So, you know, don't necessarily fall victim to technology. I love it. At the same time, the kind of the devil's in the details of kind of what we call the corner solutions, right? If something's, you know, kind of either an arbitrage opportunity, you know, look at those outside of kind of the mainstream, you know, ways to evaluate your media, because that's where the kind of the really cool and interesting cases are, where you can learn and kind of go the quarter turn of your dial, where you can really get a competitive advantage, because the mainstream stuff is everybody's aware of it, everybody is plugged into it, and it's hard to get a competitive advantage with it within that space.
That's great. Tiffany or Aarti, do you have any things to chime in on?
I don't want to call out, you know, specific tools. I think that probably like a couple years ago, marketing attribution tools were, you know, a thing that a lot of, you know, agencies and clients alike, definitely programmatic was definitely something that, you know, agencies as well had, you know, a firm grasp on, and those tools and techs that they would use. I think a look ahead, as you mentioned, shift modeling, prediction. I think that is definitely where, you know, we're about to see a new realm of tools and technologies. If, you know, there are some that, you know, companies aren't already using, we'll probably see some improvement or some, you know, more revised tools that kind of help with that, the shift metrics and the modeling there, predictive modeling there. If anything, if I say looking ahead, this is something that we should, you know, definitely been looking at in the past. We should be looking at in the present and the future as well. You know, I think someone said, you know, your data is only as good going in as it is coming out. So if you put mess in, you're going to get mess out. Definitely understanding, you know, third-party tools that you're using, or if you are building these tools, data integrity is 100% key. How you're standardizing that data. You know, if it's a one-size-fits-all customizable tool, that automatically gives me pause and hesitation, because I'm like, well, wait a minute. If so many different sources are inputting in this tool, how is this looking on the back end? And at the end of the day, if I need to actually use that tool to help me create these benchmarks or help me be able to provide some insights moving forward, how do I know that this data that I'm using is something that has been, you know, looked at and standardized and is harmonized in what it's supposed to be saying? And then, you know, you realize a few months down the road, oops, we were looking at it this way. We should have been, you know, pivoting it that way. So definitely questioning, you know, the tools that you're using, how they are interrogating their data, what auditing process is their data going through. They should be auditing this data on a regular basis, just to, you know, check for any issues or any errors or any erroneous data that can lead to wrong direction and insights moving forward.
Great. Aarti, did you have any comments in that space, or?
No, just maybe one, and to piggyback on Tiffany, it's really also questioning sometimes the investment in some of these tools as well as do our internal processes really complement? Because I think we can also go into that's a really great, it's a nice to have, but if we don't have the internal processes and our own data that would actually give us the the optimum value from some of these tools, it's like really questioning. The other thing I noticed, like for me, just again speaking about the amount of technology we seem to be buying in the marketing space, DSPs and so on, the technology procurement people are kind of my close friends as well now. So it's about really partnering with them to understand, how best we can negotiate some of these, because, we're not buying widgets, but we've not necessarily had the kind of experience as marketing procurement, SMEs. So I think sometimes I just bring some of, my technology procurement colleagues as well to identify and add value where required.
Great, thank you, Aarti. Well, we have about a minute left. There are no additional questions in the chat. So I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you to Michael and Sarah and Tina for hosting this panel today, and to Tiffany, T, and Aarti for joining. This is time always flies so fast. I can't believe we've lost 45 minutes of our day already that quick. So maybe just some parting words from each of you. As people move into this next phase of operating, we're probably going to be stay at home. Many are stay at home indefinitely. Some companies are working from home, period, for the indefinite future, through June of next year, so on and so forth. So in this virtual world, any parting suggestions or recommendations you have for people on how to stay connected in this space? I'm sure we can all offer our LinkedIn profiles to each other, but just, parting words for people as they operate and try to find better ways to do work with partners in the ad metric space.
I would just say stay safe, everybody, and make sure you balance work and life. I know it's hard for everybody to do it in this environment, but we're all trying our best. So thank you for listening to us. And if you have any more questions, we can always connect.